Fiscal policy is how the government manages the economy through the amount of money that it takes in and the way that it spends the money that it takes in. Fiscal policy deals with the amount that we pay in taxes, the amount of money that the government borrows, the amount of money that the government spends on things like the military, social programs, education, foreign aid. What I'm saying is that fiscal policy is where a lot of American politics really rests. Again, it has to deal with the amount we pay in taxes. There are very few things in the United States that are as political as the amount of money that we pay in taxes. And again, things like spending on the military, social programs, education, these are all very, very political issues. So the government, in dealing with fiscal policy, is also dealing with some of the most important and most divisive political issues that we have in the United States. It's also how the government deals with two key values. It's how the government deals with balancing liberty and equality. So by liberty, I mean how much money individuals or corporations pay in taxes, or how much they get to keep. Freedom from government. Equality deals with what the government spends that money on. Does it spend that money on education, on housing and urban development? Does it spend that money on social welfare programs? So this is where liberty and equality is balanced by the United States. So the federal government takes in money primarily through taxes that individuals pay, that corporations pay, and also what are called payroll taxes, which fund Social Security and Medicare. So the government takes in a big pot of money. Imagine a big pot of cash. And it divides that money into three different areas, or it puts that money in three different buckets. It puts some of that money into a bucket that pays for Social Security, Medicare, and government pensions. It takes a chunk of that money and it puts it in a bucket that pays for interest on the national debt. In other words, it has to pay the money that it owes currently. And then it takes what's left over and puts that into a third bucket called discretionary spending. And discretionary spending is how the government funds all of the things that it does, like the military, homeland security, education, scientific research. All of those things that government does comes out of that third bucket called discretionary spending. Now, if the government spends more than it takes in, that is called a budget deficit. For example, if the government takes in $3.3 trillion and it spends $3.9 trillion, that leaves a budget deficit of $600 billion. All of the deficits year after year, because every year there is a deficit, every year the government spends more than it takes in, all of those deficits stacked on top of each other becomes what is called the national debt. That's the total amount of money that the government owes. Currently over $18 trillion.